Greetings and welcome to TH430, where we're looking at Huebner's Introduction to Christian Ethics, where we'll be examining his section on post-Enlightenment ethics. This is where we start looking at the philosophies of the 19th century onwards, where the Enlightenment notion of reason becomes incorporated into other concepts. So the stark kind of harsh black and white reason, rationality of the Enlightenment begins to give way to other ideas that inform the reason. Now, these philosophies never walk back the full commitment to reason. They just begin to see reason as being exercised under different influences and realities that the pure reason of the Enlightenment did not consider necessary or important. Well, these thinkers from the 1800s on are going to say, no, there's actually some other very important considerations when examining reason. So the goals for this particular session will be able for you students to identify important post-Enlightenment thinkers and to articulate how post-Enlightenment thought has impacted our understanding of Christian ethics. Okay, so let's begin by taking a look at some key thinkers. The first one we're going to look at is George W.F. Hegel. He's the father of German idealism. He lived from 1770 to 1831. He emphasized the role of history in shaping ethics and reason. He saw history as a purposeful process with freedom as its ultimate goal, Geist in German. He had a dialectic approach. So dialectic is kind of like where you have a thesis, then an antithesis, and then a synthesis. And this is a process that continues to unfold over and over again. And that's how he saw kind of the truth continually arising in the past in history. So the past has something to show us about truths about ourselves that we might have otherwise forgotten, that will kind of re-emerge within particular historical settings. Of course, when we think of the dialectic, we oftentimes think of Karl Marx and his material dialectic. Now, he is one of the thinkers that is in the book that I did not put in here, not because he's not important, just because of time. So we will just go through Soren Kierkegaard. But after that, there's Marx, there's Nietzsche, there's Wittgenstein, there's Heidegger. These are all very important thinkers. They have an impact on how Christian ethics are viewed, but we're just going to deal with these six. The next one is Schleiermacher. Here's him on a German stamp. He lived from 1768 to 1834. He's often called the father of modern liberal theology. And he tried to harmonize Enlightenment with Protestant theology. He was a Reformed pastor, theologian, and he brings reason and experience together. Okay, so experience over like rational dogma, defining religion as a feeling of absolute dependence on God. So he's responsible in some ways for experience becoming predominant over doctrine, right? and bringing emotion and the experiential into ethics and into our discussion of right and wrong and the effectiveness of theology. And what's interesting is he was not trying to, let's say, understand Christianity, but to strengthen Christianity based on the framework by which Christianity was being rejected. So he just kind of owned the subjectivity and the experiential and used that as kind of the grounds for understanding religion. Of course, that's not a that does not excuse him from some of the claims that he made, which strayed far from Orthodox Christianity. So that's Schleiermacher. The next one, very interesting, Arthur Schopenhauer, 1788, 1860. He was actually a contemporary of Hegel's. He spent a short time in the academia, and he disliked Hegel so much that when he had lectures, which barely anyone ever attended, he actually made his lectures at the same time, posted his lectures, like his times for lectures, at the same time as Hegel. So, yeah, he did not like Hegel. He was a disciple of Kant. We talked a little bit about Kant last time. So, if you remember, Kant makes a distinction between kind of phenomena, that is the way that our minds kind of process information, versus the way things actually are, the noumena. So between us, for Kant, between us and everything that it's out there, there's this perceiving mind, right? So you don't actually get to experience things the way that they are, right? You just experience them as they are filtered through inescapable concepts that are embedded within the mind. All right, that's a very basic overview of Kant's position, or part of it with respect to reason. Now, what Schopenhauer is going to do is he's going to introduce the will. Okay, now this is a very complicated concept for Schopenhauer, and I don't want to get too much into it. Just know this. What he means by will is not what Luther meant by the will, and it is not what Augustine meant by a will. Okay, will is this underlying reality, right? Presenting life as filled with suffering and advocating asceticism as an escape. Okay, now I got a big, long explanation here that I don't think I'm going to get into. The will here is it's not a faculty. Just know that, okay? It's the essence of the way things are independently of our perceptions, okay? Let me say that again. The will is not a faculty like it was for Augustine, and later for medieval thinkers and Reformation thinkers like Luther. No, it's the essence of the way things are independently of our perceptions. Because remember, he's a Kantian. You don't get to see things the way they are, but the way things are exists, and it's called the will. Okay, and there's no division in it. There's no multiplicity. The only reason we think it has division and multiplicity is because of our perception, but it doesn't, right? Here's what the will is. Reality outside of our perception is just the ceaseless striving of existence. Okay, that's all it is, right? That's for Schopenhauer. No final purpose, no grand scheme, just a constant consuming of itself to maintain itself. This is why his whole thing, like suffering and existence, go hand in hand. There's more to that, but that's kind of Schopenhauer. So now you have, Hegel and history. You've got Schleiermacher and experience, right? So reason and history, reason and experience. And now you got reason in the will, but the will as this kind of eternal unfolding of reality prior to our experiences. Well, now you have John Stuart Mill. He's an Englishman, 1806 to 1873. He kind of advances what's called a utilitarian ethics, which is essentially what is moral is whatever provides the greatest happiness for the greatest number of people. Jeremy Bentham, as an act utilitarian, pick up on this. He advocated individual liberty balanced with societal needs, where freedom is limited by what he calls like the harm principle to others. Next, we have Soren, and lastly, Soren Kierkegaard. Um, so Soren Kierkegaard is Danish, 1813 to 1855. Emphasized subjective truth, individual choice, introduced realms of life, the aesthetic, which is pleasure driven, ethical, which is duty bound, religious, which is faith based. He had some scathing critiques of institutional Christianity, and insisted on personal faith over universal ethics, which made him a radical voice at the time. Um, and he has he's a very interesting writer. Um, there's just a lot you could say about any one of these thinkers. Um, but Kierkegaard is another one of these thinkers who helps kind of bring in existentialism, um, as a kind of mainstream idea. So, um, okay, what do these post Enlightenment thinkers have to do with ethics? Well, so you have here now Hegel's impact on understanding ethical development, right? Because now there's a historical logic. I'll have a video, like a 6-minute video from YouTube that helps, that does Hegel and does Kierkegaard as well. You don't have to watch them, but I think they're very helpful. They're good summaries. But yeah, all of a sudden now, history has something to tell us above reason. Religious experience has something to tell us. Individual belief and choice have something to tell us. And in all of these, what we're seeing here is this kind of movement away from all kinds of traditional knowledge, um, like we saw with the Enlightenment. But now, rather than just being rationality or pure reason, it's kind of moving back into other areas. But those other areas aren't the traditional places where they were before. It's these other areas. So, like I said, lots of other important thinkers here. Um, each of these thinkers would offer kind of a unique perspective on human purpose, morality, role of reason, freedom, faith, and what they had to do with ethical thinking. Um, yeah, so that's kind of the post Enlightenment thinkers. Now, this wasn't part of your reading, um, but I did want to just quickly. They have a recap at this point, and I just want to take you through a review of where we've been up to this point. So, if you remember, we had Greek ethics, right, in Christianity early on. How Plato and Aristotle are essential for understanding Christian ethics because a lot of the early church fathers engaged deeply with Greek ideas, right? Um, Including seeing Jesus as the ultimate source of the good, merging of reason with revelation. And if you remember, after that, we moved into the medieval and Renaissance ethics. We talked about Augustine, right? He was influenced by some Neoplatonism, merged Christian beliefs with notions of the will, just war theory. There was a lot talked about that during the medieval times. Um, we talked a little bit about the Renaissance, emphasizing human value, the faith, reason, dualism. Here's where we have Duns Scotus and William Ockham kind of redefine ethics. suggesting that the created world could be understood in its own terms instead of relation to God. So God becomes just another object of being rather than the source of all being. That kind of happens throughout this time as well, this transition into the Reformation. We talked about Enlightenment with Kant's shift. Ethics are rooted in human reason, fragmentation because there's no kind of metaphysical tradition anymore. Specifically, it's kind of more rationalistic and empirical. So you have lots of different ideas with none of them necessarily having a binding impact on people the way that the earlier traditions did. 19th and 20th century, we see attempts to try to reconnect this with meaning. So that's just a really brief. I just wanted to take us back through the places we had been as we kind of move. So when we start looking at contemporary ethical dialogue. All right, so now we're talking postmodernism, we're talking Wittgenstein and language games, we're talking Heidegger and phenomenology as a way of trying to find ways of talking about good and bad, especially with language and experience. We're trying to find reintegration of ethics and the metaphysical meaning because in a postmodern world, once modernism is shown to not be the end all of reasoning and philosophy, all of a sudden, many of these other pathways that were seen as unfruitful are once again now being re-examined as fruitful. And of course, there's always an ongoing debate. There's the conversation surrounding ethics has become quite heated and a cacophony of different moral traditions and philosophies making claims about goodness or badness. And that's where we as Christians kind of find ourselves as we finish up with this section.